The Alethi were not warriors. They had never been warriors. In all their 40,000 years of recorded history, they had never built a weapon, never fought a war, and never harmed another living creature. They were poets. They were thinkers. They were keepers of memory. Their great cities were made of crystal and song, and their libraries held the collected knowledge of 100 civilizations. The galaxy knew them as the gentle ones, the quiet ones, the ones who remember everything and hurt no one. That was why the universe chose them to die first. It began on a quiet morning in the Cythera system, far from the busy trade lanes of the galactic conquered. And GT snorts. And GT, a junior sensor operator named Velen, was running her usual scans of the outer system. She expected nothing. Cythera was a peaceful place. The most exciting thing that ever happened was the arrival of a trade ship carrying new books from the other side of the galaxy. But today her screen lit up with something she had never seen before, a subspace distortion, then another, then 10, then 100, then so many that her instruments could not count them all. She stared at the screen. Her four thin arms began to shake. "Alert the council," she whispered to the officer beside her. "Alert them now." The distortions opened like wounds in space itself, and from each one a ship emerged. They were dark and brutal, covered in sharp angles and black metal. They had no beauty. They had no grace. They were built for one thing only, and that thing was destruction. The fleet spread across the outer system like a swarm of insects, thousands upon thousands of warships, more than anyone in the conquered had ever seen gathered in one place. The Alethi had no idea who they were. They tried to make contact. The Alethi always tried to talk first. They sent greetings in every known language. They sent mathematical sequences. They sent music. They sent offers of friendship and trade and peace. The answer came not in words but in fire. The outer colony on the moon of Velis 3 was home to 2 million Alethi. It was a research station, a place of learning, full of scientists and students and families. The Dark Fleet did not send a warning. It did not make demands. It simply opened fire. Beams of searing red energy rained down from orbit, turning the colony into a sea of flame. Buildings melted. The ground itself turned to glass. 2 million souls were gone in less than an hour. Then and only then did the invaders speak. A single message was broadcast across every frequency in the system. The voice was deep and cold, and it spoke in a language the Alethi translation systems could barely process, but the meaning was clear enough. "We are the Draconari Dominion. Submit or be unmade." The Alethi High Council gathered in the crystal chamber beneath the surface of their homeworld. 12 elders sat in a circle, their long, delicate faces filled with a terror that none of them had ever felt before. They were a species that had no word for war in their native language. They had to borrow the word from other species just to discuss what was happening to them. Elder Matriarch Cylindri sat at the head of the circle. She was old even by Alethi standards. Her shell had turned from deep blue to pale silver with age, and her eyes held the weight of 3 centuries of memory. She had led her people through famine, through plague, through political crisis, but she had never led them through anything like this. "The fleet is moving toward our Homeworld, said Advisor Kethen, his voice trembling, they have not responded to any further communication. Their ground forces are deploying on Valleys 4. The reports say they are large. Armored, they are killing everything they find. How long, Cylindra asked, before they reach the home world? 3 days, perhaps less. Silence filled the chamber. 3 days. 3 days before everything the Alethi had ever built, every poem, every song, every memory was turned to ash. We have sent distress signals to every member of the Conquered, said another advisor. The Relani are too far away. The Gorvathi say they cannot spare ships. The Melvin have closed their borders. The Torvathi say they are sorry. Sorry, the word hung in the air like poison. There is one option we have not tried, said Kethen very quietly. Everyone looked at him. They all knew what he meant. The humans. Cylindra closed her eyes. Of all the species in the galactic Conquered, humans were the ones she understood the least. They were loud, they were aggressive. They bred like insects and fought like demons. When they had first appeared on the galactic stage, barely 2 centuries ago, they had shocked everyone with their capacity for violence. They had fought 3 interstellar wars in the span of 100 years, and they had won all 3. Their warfleet, the United Terran Armada, was the most powerful military force in known space. Cylindra herself had spoken against their admission into the Conquered. She had called them dangerous. She had called them unpredictable. She had said that a species so addicted to war had no place among civilized peoples. And now she needed them. The irony was not lost on her. Send the signal, she said. Her voice was barely a whisper. Send it to Earth. Invoke the Mutual Defense Pact. Matriarch, said Kethen, the humans may not come. We have never been there. Friends, we have never traded with them. We voted against them twice in the Conquered Assembly. Why would they help us? Cylindri opened her eyes. Because I have read their history, she said, all of it, every war, every battle, every act of terrible violence. But I also read about the times they crossed oceans to save strangers. I read about the times they gave their lives for people they had never met. They are violent. Yes, but there is something else in them, something I do not fully understand, something that makes them run toward the fire when every other species runs away. She paused. Send the signal, make it simple, make it honest. The signal was composed in less than a minute. It was transmitted at maximum power on every Terran emergency frequency. It crossed the vast emptiness of space at faster than light speed, bouncing through relay stations and communication buoys until it reached a small blue planet orbiting a yellow star in an unremarkable corner of the galaxy. The message read, "We are the Alethi of Sitharis. We are under attack. We have no weapons. We have no fleet. We are dying. Please come." On Earth's moon, deep inside the armored fortress that served as the headquarters of the United Terran Armada, the signal arrived on the desk of Admiral Kiera Vasquez at exactly 3:47 hours Luna Standard Time. She was not asleep. She never seemed to sleep. Her officers joked that she ran on black coffee and pure stubbornness, and they were not entirely wrong. Vasquez read the signal once. She read it again. Then she set down her coffee, stood up and walked to the command center. 200 officers looked up as she entered. The main screen showed the Signal still repeating. We are dying, please come. Vasquez stared at the screen for exactly 4 seconds, then she turned to her communications officer. Get me every fleet commander in the Armada, she said, every single one now. Ma'am, the officer asked, what should I tell them? Admiral Kira Vasquez, the woman who had won the Battle of Proxima, who had broken the siege of Kepler 442, who had never once in her 30-year career left an ally behind, looked at the screen one more time. Tell them to wake up, she said. We have work to do. Within the hour, every Terran warship in the solar system began powering up its engines. The wolves had heard the call, and the wolves were hungry. The United Terran Armada did not move. Like other fleets, other species planned their military operations over weeks or months. They held meetings, they debated strategy, they filed reports and waited for approval from committees. Humanity did none of these things. When the call came, they simply moved. Within 6 hours of Admiral Vasquez's order, 1,200 warships had assembled in formation above the dark side of Earth's moon. It was the largest fleet mobilization in human history, and it had been organized faster than most species could arrange a dinner party. The fleet was a terrifying sight. At its core were 12 Titan-class dreadnoughts, each one over 3 km long, covered in armor plating thick enough to stop a small asteroid. Around them swarmed hundreds of cruisers, destroyers, frigates and gunships. Carrier groups launched thousands of fighter craft that buzzed between the larger ships like angry bees, supply ships, medical vessels, troop transports carrying 500,000 Terran Marines. It was not just a fleet. It was a moving city of war. And at the very center of it all was the flagship, the TAS Indomitable. 12 km from bow to stern, 100 decks, crew of 40,000. It was the largest warship ever built by any species in the known galaxy, and it had never lost a battle. Some alien species called it a ship, others called it a monster. The crew simply called it home. Admiral Vasquez stood on the bridge of the Indomitable and looked out at her fleet through the viewport. Behind her, senior officers were running through final systems checks. Everything was green, everything was ready. Admiral, said Captain Des Malhotra, her second in command, we have received updated intelligence from the Concord relay network. The enemy fleet in the Cythera system is estimated at 8,000 vessels. A murmur ran through the bridge crew. 8,000 against 1,200. Those were not good numbers. Vasquez did not blink. What class of ships? A mix of heavy cruisers and assault carriers mostly. Their flagship appears to be something much larger. We have no detailed specs on their weapons or shielding, so we are outnumbered, outgunned, and flying blind into a system we have never visited to fight an enemy we have never met. Vasquez allowed herself a small smile. Sounds like a Tuesday. Prepare the fleet for slip space jump. Malhotra hesitated for just a moment. Admiral, some of the junior officers are asking about the odds. Vasquez turned to face the bridge. Every officer was watching her. She could see the fear in some of their eyes, the excitement in others. They were young. Many of them, they had trained for this their entire lives, but training was not the same as war. Let me tell you something about odds, she said. Her voice was calm and steady. The voice of a woman who had walked through fire and come out the other side. The Draconari do not know us. They have conquered species that surrendered, species that begged, species that ran. They have never fought humans. They do not know what we are. And by the time they figure it out, it will be too late. She paused and looked at each officer in turn. We are not going to Scytherus to even the odds. We are going there to remind the galaxy why no one attacks our friends. Jump the fleet. The order spread through all 1,200 ships. In seconds, navigation officers locked coordinates, engineers pushed reactors to full power, slipspace drives hummed, and then screamed as they tore holes in the fabric of reality itself. The entire fleet jumped at the same time, 1,200 ships perfectly synchronized, vanishing from the solar system in a flash of blue-white light. The conquered monitoring station on Mars recorded the event and transmitted it across the galaxy. Alien commanders who saw the footage could not believe what they were witnessing. Most fleets needed days to synchronize 100 ships for a group jump. The humans had moved over 1,000 in a single heartbeat. The jump would take 14 hours, 14 hours, through the strange, dark space between the stars. On every ship, crews prepared for battle. Marines checked their weapons and armor. Pilots ran simulations in their cockpits. Medics stocked their bays with blood and bandages. Chaplains held services for every faith. Engineers welded extra armor plates onto hulls by hand because there was always room for a little more protection. On the Indomitable, Vasquez retreated to her quarters for 1 hour. She sat at her desk, pulled out a pen and paper, real paper, an old habit, and wrote a letter to her daughter back on Earth. She did not write about the battle or the odds or the enemy. She wrote about the garden behind their house. She asked if the roses were blooming yet. She told her daughter she was proud of her. Then she folded the letter, sealed it, placed it in the drawer marked in case, and returned to the bridge. Far away in the Scythera system, the Alethi were running out of time. The Drakkar ground forces had landed on 3 more moons. Reports came in every hour, each one worse than the last. The invaders were methodical in their destruction. They did not just conquer. They erased. Libraries were burned. Archives were destroyed. Artworks that had taken centuries to create were smashed in seconds. It was not just an invasion, it was an extinction. On the homeworld, millions of Alethi had retreated into the deep underground chambers beneath the capital city. These chambers had been built thousands of years ago as shelters against natural disasters, but they had never been designed to withstand orbital bombardment. The walls shook constantly as Drakkar ships fired on the surface. Above, dust fell from the ceiling. Children cried, the old prayed. Elder matriarch Silendri moved among her people, offering what comfort she could. She told them stories. She recited the old poems. She held the hands of the frightened and looked into their eyes and told them that help was coming. But privately, in the silence of her own mind, she had begun to accept that help might not arrive in time. The humans were far away. The Drakkari were here. And the math was simple. Then, at exactly the 14th hour after the Terran fleet had jumped, the sensors on every remaining Alethi station went wild. The sky above Scythera split open. It was not a gentle opening. It was violent, like a wound being torn in the Body of space itself. Blue-white light exploded across the darkness in 1,000 points, each one. A slip space exit point, each one. Delivering a Terran warship into the system. They came in perfect formation. Dreadnoughts at the center, cruisers on the flanks, destroyers racing ahead like hunting dogs, fighters pouring out of carriers in swarms so thick they looked like clouds. The Drakkari fleet detected them. Immediately, 8,000 alien ships turned their sensors toward the new arrivals. For a long moment, nothing happened. The two fleets simply stared at each other across the black emptiness of space. Then Admiral Vasquez opened a broadband transmission. Her voice was carried on every frequency, in every language the translation systems could manage. It reached every Drakkari ship. It reached every Elite shelter. It reached every conquered monitoring station in the sector. "This is Admiral Kiera Vasquez of the United Terran Armada," she said. Her voice was flat and cold, like steel dragged across stone. "The Elite are under our protection. You will withdraw your forces from this system immediately. You have 60 seconds to begin your retreat." She paused. "After 60 seconds, we stop being polite." On the surface, in the underground shelters, the Elite heard her voice. Through their speakers, Cylindri stood, perfectly still, her old silver eyes wide. Around her, her people had gone silent. They did not understand everything the human admiral had said, but they understood the tone. It was the tone of someone who was not afraid, the tone of someone who had come not to negotiate but to fight. The 60 seconds passed. The Drakkari did not move. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Captain Malhotra looked at the Admiral. "They are not withdrawing." Vasquez nodded slowly. She had expected this. She had hoped for it. "All ships," she said, "weapons free." 1,200 warships opened fire at the same moment, and the Cythera system turned into a storm of light and death. The wolves had arrived, and they had brought their teeth. The first 30 seconds of the Battle of Cytheris were the most violent 30 seconds in the history of the galaxy. 1,200 Terran warships unleashed everything they had in a single coordinated volley. Missiles, railgun rounds, plasma lances, and nuclear-tipped torpedoes crossed the gap between the two fleets in a wall of fire so dense that sensors on both sides went temporarily blind. The Drakkari had never experienced anything like it. They were used to fighting species that approached war carefully, species that tested their enemy with small attack, species that tried to minimize their losses. Humans did not fight like that. Humans hit first, hit hard, and kept hitting until the other side stopped moving. The opening volley destroyed over 200 Drakkari ships before they could even raise their full shields. Explosions bloomed across the enemy formation like flowers made of light. Debris fields formed instantly, creating a maze of spinning wreckage that made navigation dangerous for both sides. But the Drakkari were not weak. They were an empire that had conquered 200 civilizations across thousands of years. Their ships were tough, their weapons were powerful, and they had numbers. 8,000 ships recovered from the initial shock and fired back with everything they had. The battle became chaos. Commander Ren Akafor sat in the tactical center of the cruiser TAS Lagos, watching her screens as the two fleets collided. She was 31 years old, the youngest tactical commander in the fleet. and she had been given command of the 7th Destroyer Wolfpack, 12 fast attack destroyers whose job was to find weak points in the enemy formation and tear them open. Enemy formation is tightening around their core fleet, she reported to Admiral Vasquez over the command channel. They are protecting their flagship. Then hit their flanks, Vasquez replied. Make them spread out, I want their formation broken. Akafursat smiled. Breaking formations was what she did best. She ordered her wolf pack to full speed and drove them straight into the gap between two Drakenhari battle groups. The destroyers were small and fast, designed to get close and cause maximum damage. They weaved through enemy fire there, point defense systems shooting down incoming missiles, while their main guns punched holes in Drakenhari cruisers at close range. The fighting was brutal and personal. At close range, space combat lost its elegance. It became a brawl, ship against ship, crew against crew. Akafur watched as the destroyer TAS Shrike took a direct hit to its engine section and began spinning out of control. The captain of the Shrike, rather than eject, aimed his crippled ship at the nearest enemy cruiser and accelerated. The resulting collision destroyed both vessels. This was what terrified the Drakthul most, not the human weapons, not their tactics, but their willingness to die. Every species in the galaxy had a survival instinct. Humans had one too, but they seemed able to turn it off when they decided something mattered more than their own lives. The Drakthul had no framework for understanding this. In their culture, individual survival was the highest priority. A Drakthul captain whose ship was damaged would retreat. A human captain whose ship was damaged would try to take an enemy with them on the way out. While the space battle raged above, a different kind of war was being fought on the surface of the Alethi homeworld. Terran marine drop pods had begun falling from orbit within minutes of the battle's start. Each pod carried a squad of 8 Marines in full combat armor. They hit the ground at high speed, their pods splitting open like metal seeds, and the Marines charged out shooting. The Drakthul ground forces were enormous. Each soldier stood nearly 3 m tall, covered in biomechanical armor that was fused to their thick reptilian skin. They carried weapons that could melt through stone. They were fearless and disciplined and had never been pushed back by any ground force in their empire's history. The Terran Marines were shorter, lighter and softer. On paper they should have been crushed. But war is not fought on paper. Sergeant Major Elena Cruz led a platoon of 60 Marines into the ruined streets of the Alethi capital city. The crystal towers that had once been beautiful were now shattered and burning. Drakari soldiers moved through the rubble in groups of 10, hunting for Alethi survivors. Cruz and her Marines hit them from 3 directions at once. Human tactics on the ground were the same as in space: speed, aggression, and overwhelming violence, applied at the point of maximum impact. The Marines used the rubble for cover, moving in fast bursts, covering each other with precise fire. Their weapons were smaller than the Drakari ones, but they were accurate, and they aimed for the gaps in the alien armor. The first Drakari squad they encountered was dead in 40 seconds. The second lasted slightly longer. The third tried to retreat and found Marines already behind them. Cruz had sent a fire team through the underground tunnels to cut off the Escape route, the Drakhari were not used to enemies that moved this fast or thought this many steps ahead. In the underground shelters, the Alethi could hear the fighting above. The sounds were terrible explosions, gunfire screams, and languages they did not understand, but for the first time in days the explosions were not getting closer, they were staying in one place, and then they were moving away. Humans were pushing the invaders back. An Alethi poet named Mythalan had been recording everything since the invasion began. He had documented the destruction of the outer colonies, the flight underground, the despair. Now he pressed his recording device against the wall and captured something new, the sound of human boots on the ground above, running forward always. Forward, never back. Back in orbit, the battle had been raging for 6 hours. The Terran fleet had taken heavy losses. Over 100 ships were destroyed or disabled, but the Drakhari had lost far more. Nearly 1,000 vessels were gone and their formation was fracturing. Commander HFY saw an opportunity. Large wing of roughly 400 Drakhari ships had been pushed toward the system's gas giant during the fighting. They were trying to regroup in the planet's sensor shadow. HFY studied the gas giant's gravitational data and saw something that made her heart race. She contacted Vasquez. Admiral, I can end that entire wing, but I need 3 cruisers in about 20 minutes. Explain. The gas giant has a gravitational eddy near its upper atmosphere. If I can herd them into the right position and then detonate a series of gravitational mines in sequence, the combined effect will create a cascading orbital decay. Their ships will be pulled into the atmosphere. There was a brief pause on the channel. That is either brilliant or insane, Vasquez said. It can be both, Admiral. Do it. HFY executed the maneuver with the precision of a surgeon. Her wolfpack harassed the Drakhari wing, nipping at their flanks, forcing them deeper into the gas giant's gravity well. When they were in position, she launched the gravitational mines. The detonation sequence lasted 11 seconds. The effect lasted much longer. The gravity well shifted. The 400 Drakhari ships found themselves caught in a pull they could not escape. Their engines screamed as they tried to climb out, but the math was against them. One by one, then in groups, then all at once, they were dragged down into the swirling clouds of the gas giant. Sensors tracked them until they were crushed by pressure. None survived. It was the single most devastating tactical maneuver in the history of space warfare. Akavar had destroyed 400 enemy ships without firing a single conventional weapon. On the Drakhari flagship, the Dominion's Maw, Supreme Commander Thozarak watched the destruction of his western wing with something he had never felt before. He searched his mind for the name of this emotion. It took him a moment. Fear. He had conquered 200 worlds. He had burned civilizations and broken empires. No one had ever made him afraid. But these humans, these small, soft, short-lived creatures from an unremarkable planet, were tearing his fleet apart with a ferocity that defied everything he knew about war. His losses were mounting. His formation was broken. His ground forces on the Alethi homeworld were reporting that the human soldiers were pushing them back. Block by block. Thozarak made his decision. If he could not have this system, no one would. He turned to his weapons officer. Activate the world breaker. Deep within the Dominion's maw, a weapon that had never been used in combat began to power up. It was a planet-killing energy lance capable of cracking a world in half with a single shot. It had been built as a last resort, a weapon of pure spite. It would take 30 minutes to charge. In 30 minutes, the Alethi homeworld and every living thing on it, including the human marines fighting on its surface, would cease to exist. The world breaker's energy signature was impossible to hide. Every sensor in the system detected it. On the bridge of the Indomitable, an alarm screamed. Vasquez looked at the readings. She understood immediately what they meant. How long? She asked. 30 minutes, Admiral, maybe less. Vasquez stared at the screen. Somewhere down on that planet, her marines were fighting. Somewhere down there, millions of Alethi were hiding in shelters, trusting that the humans would save them. She had made them a promise. Simply by showing up, she intended to keep it. Get me a firing solution on that flagship, she said quietly. We are going to kill that weapon, whatever it takes. The Dominion's maw sat at the center of the Draconari fleet like a dark heart. It was massive, nearly 40 km long, surrounded by 3 rings of the most heavily armed warships in the Draconari Armada. Its hull was layered with armor so thick that conventional weapons could barely scratch it, and somewhere inside that monster, the world breaker was charging. 28 minutes until it could fire. 28 minutes until the Alethi homeworld was turned to dust. Admiral Vasquez studied the tactical display on the bridge of the Indomitable. The path to the Dominion's maw was a killing field. Any ship that tried to reach it would have to pass through the concentrated fire of the elite Draconari Guard fleet. Over 500 ships that had been held in reserve for exactly this kind of situation. Give me options, she said to her staff. Captain Malkier ran the numbers. His face told her everything before he spoke. A conventional assault would take hours, Admiral. We would need to peel back their defensive layers one at a time. We do not have hours. Long-range bombardment. At this distance, our weapons cannot penetrate the Mauler's armor. We would need to get within close range to have any chance of reaching the world breaker's power core. How close? Malhatri paused. Boarding range or closer? Vasquez understood. She had always known somewhere deep in her gut that this was how it would end. Not in a comfortable bed on Earth, not in retirement watching the sunset, but here in the black space between the stars, doing the only thing that mattered. She opened a private channel to the fleet's 12 most experienced captains. She told them what she needed. She told them the odds. She told them they would probably not survive. Then she asked if they would follow her. Every single one said yes without hesitation. The strike group formed up around the Indomitable. 12 ships, each one commanded by an officer who had served for decades, who had families back on Earth, who had every reason to want to live. They formed a wedge formation with the Indomitable at the tip, and they pointed themselves at the heart of the Draxhari fleet. Before they began, Vasquez did 2 things. First, she transferred fleet command to Commander Akefer, who was now the highest-ranking officer outside the strike group. Akefer's voice cracked when she acknowledged the order, but she held Herself together, she was a Terran. Officer, she would do her job. Second, Vasquez opened a channel to the entire fleet, not just the strike group. Every ship, every Marine on the ground, every pilot and every fighter, she spoke. Simply because there was no time for speeches. This is Vasquez. The enemy has a weapon. Pointed at the Alethi homeworld. We are going to stop it. Some of us will not come back, but the people on that planet will live. That is enough. That has always been enough. Vasquez out. Then she gave the order, all ahead full ramming speed. The strike group surged forward. 13 ships accelerating at maximum power, driving straight into the mouth of the beast. The Drakthar Guard fleet opened fire immediately. The space ahead turned into a wall of energy beams, missiles, and railgun rounds so dense it looked solid. The TAS Defiant was the first to fall. Concentrated barrage from 3 Drakthar battle cruisers hit it. Broadside, the ship broke apart, its hull cracking open like an egg, but even as it died, the Defiant's captain fired every remaining torpedo into the nearest enemy ship, gutting it from stem to stern. The TAS Iron will lasted 2 minutes. Longer, its shields failed under sustained fire and plasma began eating through its armor. The captain, a quiet woman named Sarah Chen, ordered her crew to the escape pods. When the last pod launched, she aimed her dying ship at the largest Drakthar vessel blocking the path and pushed the reactor to overload. The explosion was bright enough to blind sensors for 3 seconds. When the light faded, the Drakthar battle cruiser was gone, and so was the Iron Will. One by one, the ships of the strike group were destroyed. Each one took at least one enemy vessel with it. Each one bought the Indomitable a few more seconds, a few more kilometers closer to the Dominion's maw. The TAS Relentless rammed a Drakthar cruiser at full speed. The TAS Fury detonated its ammunition stores to create a debris field that blocked enemy fire for precious seconds. The TAS Last Word lived up to its name, broadcasting an insult at the Drakthari fleet in the seconds before it exploded. By the time the Indomitable broke through the final defensive ring, only 2 other ships remained, and both were crippled, falling behind. The flagship was alone. The Indomitable was in terrible shape. 1/3 of its decks were on fire. Its port engines were gone. Its shields had failed long ago. The hull was torn open in a dozen places, and atmosphere was leaking into space. Hundreds of crew members were dead, and hundreds more were fighting fires, sealing breaches and keeping the ship moving by sheer force of will. On the bridge, half the stations were dark. Sparks rained from the ceiling. The viewport was cracked but holding. Through it, Vasquez could see the Dominion's maw directly ahead, growing larger every second. She could see the glow of the World Breaker building in its core. The reading said it was at 92% charge, minutes away from firing. All remaining crew abandoned ship. Vasquez ordered, "Get to the escape pods now." Admiral Malhotra began. "That is an order, Captain. Get our people off this ship." Malhotra stared at her for a long moment, then he saluted the old-fashioned kind, hand to forehead. "It has been an honor, Admiral." "The honor was mine. Now go." The crew evacuated. Escape pods launched from every section of the dying ship, shooting away into the chaos of the battle like seeds from a burning tree. Vasquez watched them go on the few working screens she had left. She counted them. She wanted to make sure everyone got off. When the last pod launched, she was alone on the bridge. She sat in the captain's chair and looked at the Dominion's maw filling the viewport. It was close now, very close. She could see the details of its hull, the weapon ports, the armored plates. She could see the world breakers glow, pulsing like a heartbeat. She reached for the engine controls and pushed them beyond their maximum rating. The Indomitable groaned, metal screamed. The ship accelerated one final time, aimed directly at the center of the Dominion's maw. The Drakari fired everything they had. At the incoming ship, beams cut through the hull, explosions tore away entire sections. The Indomitable was dying, breaking apart in real time. But its reinforced prow, 12 layers of the hardest alloy humanity could forge, designed for exactly this moment, held together. The Indomitable hit the Dominion's maw at a speed that sensors could barely track. The impact was beyond anything the word collision could describe. The Terran flagship's prow punched through the Drakari vessel's armor. Like a spear through flesh, it drove deep into the core of the ship, through deck after deck, until it reached the world breaker's energy chamber. The chamber ruptured. The energy that had been building to destroy a planet was released all at once, but with no direction. It consumed the Dominion's maw from the inside out. The explosion expanded outward in a sphere of white light that swallowed both ships, then the surrounding guard fleet, then the debris of the entire battle zone. It was visible from the surface of the Alethi homeworld, a second sun that burned in the sky for almost 10 seconds. When the light faded, the Dominion's maw was gone, the Indomitable was gone, the world breaker was gone, and Admiral Kira Vasquez was gone. The Draconari fleet shattered, without their supreme commander, without their flagship, without their ultimate weapon. The remaining ships fell into confusion. Orders contradicted each other. Captains panicked. Some tried to retreat, some tried to fight, some simply stopped and drifted, their crews too stunned to act. The surviving Terran warships, battered and bleeding, did not stop. Commander Akefer, now in command of the entire fleet, gave a simple order: finish it. The Terran fleet swept through the disorganized Draconari remnants like a fire through dry grass. Within 4 hours, the enemy fleet was either destroyed, captured, or in full retreat. The Draconari ground forces, cut off from orbital support, began surrendering to the Terran Marines. The Battle of Scytherus was over. On the surface, in the underground shelters, the Alethi felt the shaking stop. The explosions above went quiet. For a long time no one moved, no one dared to believe it was real. Then a Marine appeared at the entrance to the main shelter. He was young, barely more than a boy, and he was covered in dust and blood. His armor was cracked, his left arm hung at his side, clearly broken, but he was smiling. "It is safe," he said. "You can come out now." Elder Matriarch Cylinder walked toward him slowly. She looked at this small, injured creature who had come across the galaxy to bleed for her people. She wanted to ask 1,000 questions. She wanted to understand how a species could do what his species had just done. She asked only one: "Your admiral, the one who spoke to us, is she alive?" The Marine's smile faded. He looked down. For a moment, when he looked up, his eyes were wet, but his voice was steady. "No, ma'am, she did not make it. She gave her ship and her life to stop the weapon that would have killed your world. Silandria felt something crack inside her chest, a feeling she had no name for. Grief for a stranger, gratitude so heavy it was almost pain. Why, she whispered, we were not your friends, we did not deserve this. The young Marine straightened up, wincing at the pain in his arm, and met her eyes. You asked for help, ma'am, that is all we needed to hear. The days after the battle were quiet in a way that felt unnatural. The Scytherus system, which had been filled with the noise of war for so long, was suddenly silent. The Drakari were gone. Their surviving ships had fled beyond the galactic rim, running as fast as their engines could carry them. They left behind nothing but wreckage and shame. The Terran fleet drifted in orbit above the Alethi homeworld. Of the 1,200 ships that had jumped into the system, only 783 remained. Some were barely holding together, their hulls patched with emergency sealant and held in place by stubborn engineering crews who refused to let their ships die. Others were dark and cold, drifting without power, waiting for tow ships to bring them home. The cost was staggering: 417 ships destroyed, 912,000 human lives lost, 912,000 people who had woken up one morning, read a signal from a species they had never met, and decided that those strangers were worth dying for. Commander Ren Akafer stood on the bridge of the TAS Lagos, which was now the temporary flagship by default. She had not slept in 3 days. Her eyes were red and her hands would not stop shaking, but she kept working because there was still work to do. There were wounded to evacuate, damaged ships to stabilize, and 100,000 small decisions that needed to be made every hour. She also had to write the letters, 417 letters to 417 families explaining how their loved ones had died. She started writing the first one and had to stop after 2 sentences because she could not see the screen through her tears. She wiped her eyes, took a breath, and started again. On the surface, the Alethi emerged from their shelters and saw their world for the first time since the invasion. The damage was severe. Entire cities had been reduced to rubble. The crystal towers that had been the pride of their civilization lay in shattered heaps. Libraries that had held centuries of knowledge were burned to ash. But the world was still there. The sky was still above them. The ground was still beneath their feet. They were alive, and they were alive because of the humans. Elder Matriarch Cylindri walked through the ruins of the capital city with Mythalan the poet at her side. He was recording everything as he always did. They passed Terran Marines who were already helping with the cleanup, lifting rubble with their bare hands, carrying Alethi children on their shoulders, sharing their food and water with anyone who needed it. The same soldiers who had fought like demons the day before were now gentle and careful, as if they were handling something precious. Cylindri watched a human medic treating an injured Alethi child. The medic was speaking softly, using a translator device, telling the child a story about a rabbit and a turtle while she cleaned the wound. The child was laughing. I was wrong about them, Cylindra said quietly. Mythalan looked at her. What do you mean? When the humans first came to the Concord, I spoke against them. I said they were too violent, too dangerous. I said they had no place among civilized Species, she paused and watched the medic make the child laugh again. I looked at their wars and their weapons, and I thought I understood what they were. I did not. I only saw half of them, the half that fights. I did not see the half that heals. The news of the Battle of Scythrus spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Every species in the galactic conquered heard the story. The details were almost impossible to believe. A fleet outnumbered 7-1, a battle that lasted less than a day. An admiral who drove her own flagship into the enemy at the speed of light to save a world that was not her own. The reaction was overwhelming. Species that had ignored the elite distress call sent messages of shame and apology. Species that had dismissed humans as uncivilized brutes sent formal letters of respect. The Relani, who had been too far away to help, sent their entire medical fleet to assist with the recovery. The Gorvathi, who had said they could not spare ships, quietly began redesigning their military along Terran principles. The Galactic Concord held an emergency session. The debate was short because there was nothing to debate. Humanity was granted a permanent seat on the Concord Security Council by unanimous vote. Every species voted yes, even those that had never agreed on anything before. The motion was accompanied by a simple statement: Earth answered when no one else would. Earth bled when no one else dared. Let this never be forgotten. On Earth, the news arrived with a mixture of pride and grief. Flags were lowered to half-staff on every human world. A day of mourning was declared for the fallen. Admiral Vasquez was posthumously awarded every honor humanity had to give, and several new ones were created specifically for her. Her daughter received the folded letter from the drawer marked in case and read about roses. The Drakari Dominion collapsed within a year. The empire that had terrorized the Outer Rim for millennia fell apart. From the inside, their myth of invincibility had been shattered at Scythrus, and without that myth they had nothing to hold their conquered worlds in line. Rebellions erupted across their territory. Warlords turned on each other. Within 2 years, the Dominion existed only in history books. A new phrase entered the Drakari language. It had no direct translation, but the closest meaning was, do not wake the Terrans. It was used to describe a mistake so catastrophic that it could never be undone. Parents said it to their children. Officers said it to their soldiers. It became the most important lesson their species ever learned. Commander Akefer was promoted to Rear Admiral. She was given command of a newly built fleet and asked to choose a name for her flagship. She did not hesitate. She named it the TAS Vasquez. At the christening ceremony, she stood before 10,000 officers and crew and spoke about the woman who had taught her what command really meant. She did not ask us to be brave, Akefer said. She showed us what bravery looked like and trusted us to follow. She did not give orders from safety. She led from the front, and when the time came, she gave everything she had so that strangers could live. That is not just leadership, that is love. And as long as this fleet flies, we will carry her name and her example with us. The Alethi began building the Remembrance of Fire on the first anniversary of the battle. It was the most ambitious construction project in their history, using techniques that combined Alethi crystal shaping with Terran engineering. They carved a memorial into the surface of their world, so large it could be seen from orbit. Every human who had died at Scythoris was named, every ship was listed, every act of sacrifice was recorded in crystal. That would last for 1,000,000 years. Mythalan spent 10 years writing his masterwork. He called it When Wolves Answer. It was a poem cycle that told the story of the battle from every perspective. The terrified Alethi in the shelters, the Terran pilots in their fighters, the Marines on the ground, the Admiral on her bridge. It was translated into every language in the conquered and became the most widely read work in galactic history. Scholars said it was the finest piece of literature ever written by any species. Its final lines were recited at every memorial, every graduation, every moment, when the beings of the conquered needed to remember what courage looked like. Years passed, the galaxy changed, new alliances were formed, old wounds healed. The Alethi rebuilt their cities, stronger and more beautiful than before, with human architects working alongside their own. The crystal towers rose again, and this time woven into their foundations were threads of Terran steel. On the 10th anniversary of the battle, a Terran warship passed through the Scythoris system on a routine patrol. It was the TAS Indomitable II, named for the ship that had given its life to save a world. It was smaller than the original, but it carried the same name and the same spirit. A young ensign stood at the viewport and looked down at the Alethi homeworld. She could see the remembrance of fire glowing on the surface, the names of the dead shining in the light of the system star. She had been a child when the battle happened. She had grown up hearing the stories. She had joined the Armada because of them. An Alethi communication came through on the ship speakers. It was a tradition, now one that happened every time a Terran warship entered the Scythoris system. A simple message broadcast from the surface in the Alethi language and in English. Welcome back. We remember. We will always remember. The ensign touched the viewport with her fingertips. The names of 912,000 humans glowed below her, each one a person who had decided that a stranger's life was worth their own. She thought about Admiral Vasquez, who had written a letter about roses before flying her ship into the heart of a monster. She thought about the Marine with the broken arm who had told the matriarch that asking for help was enough. She thought about every single person who had answered the signal. She whispered 2 words to the glowing world below. We're still here. And somewhere in the vastness of space, the galaxy slept a little easier knowing that was true.